Hello. Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
ReShonda Young is at a front door in Waterloo, Iowa. She's holding a clipboard, but this is no visit about politics or religion.
Okay, so as you maybe heard, maybe not, I'm in the process of starting a bank, a community bank here in Waterloo.
ReShonda is starting a bank, and not just any bank. If ReShonda can get it up and running, it will be the only Black-owned bank in the state of Iowa, and could be the first in the U.S. to open up in the last 2 decades. I'm Jamie Smith Hopkins, coming soon from the Center for Public Integrity and Transmitter Media, Season 2 of The Heist. This season, a heist pulled off through centuries of discrimination and exclusion. A heist that has left its mark on every town and city and bank account in this country. The wealth gap between Black and white Americans. The reality is that in the United States, the median wealth of a white family is 8 times that of a Black family. And you can't talk about wealth in this country without talking about banks. It's where most people turn when we need to buy a house or start a business. Banks are gatekeepers to that big dream of starting something, owning something. ReShonda wants her bank to change some of the systems that have excluded people of color.
To provide an avenue for people to be able to get the financial services that they need and decrease the wealth gap.
But ReShonda needs to raise at least $10 million of seed funding in a town that's been ranked the worst place in the country, economically, for Black people. To raise $10 million, she'll have to face the same wealth gap she's trying to fix.
It may seem impossible, but I really don't feel like it is.
This season, I'm looking at how ReShonda got here, how we all got here, what caused the wealth gap, and how banks have been making it worse when they could be making it better. Look for Season 2 of The Heist, starting February 22nd, wherever you listen to podcasts. Welcome, everyone. Very glad that you could be here to join us for this conversation with ReShonda Young. As you just heard in the trailer, the second season of our podcast, The Heist, focused on ReShonda's effort to combat the racial wealth gap in her community by working to open her state's only Black-owned bank. We'll share links to the podcast in case you haven't heard it, but we're here today, a year later, with ReShonda for a conversation about that gap and to hear what has changed since the podcast came out. So thank you again, ReShonda, for being here. I'd like to kick off the discussion by playing a short clip from the first episode of the podcast where you're talking about the unequal footing that many Black families in America find themselves on in the race to build generational wealth.
These families and generations of white families have, they have such a head start. And, our parents and grandparents, they've run hard. But like when I think about it in my mind's eye, I'm like, I see this racetrack and I see like my grandparents running, but they weren't even on the track. They hadn't even got to the track. They're running to get to the track. And you've got this, other people in the race who they've been on the track. They're so far ahead. How do you catch up?
So for those who may not be familiar with your story or haven't had the chance to listen to the podcast yet, can you share what started you on a quest to open a bank in Waterloo, Iowa?
Yeah, so I was having a few issues with banks, but there was just one in particular where I was told that they didn't want my business. There was nothing that really, in my opinion, sparked that conversation, and it was just a whole lot of things over more than a decade that culminated right in that moment of being told that I wasn't wanted at that institution. And it was just a time where I'm just like, okay, God, what am I supposed to do? I'm just tired of this. I'm so tired. I did not expect the answer to be, you're going to start a bank, But since that was the answer, then it really is the most logical thing to do, even though it seems kind of illogical to say, okay, I'm going to start a bank. But it really is the most logical thing to do, to not just for myself, but for other Blacks and minorities in the community, other women, and it's just it's a road to travel, but it's the thing that will help make a difference, make a positive difference for us.
Thanks for sharing that. And as you certainly know, and probably many, if not all, the people listening to this know, wealth inequality is widening in the U.S. And that's something that affects people of all races, but the wealth gap between white and Black families is particularly stark. And it's not improving, economists say, because the financial impact of slavery and the discrimination that followed has these intergenerational consequences. It keeps rippling very much in the way you were talking about with the racetrack. And these are consequences the country hasn't really tried to redress. So I like to play another clip from the podcast, which is William Darity at Duke University, who has long researched the wealth gap, talking about a long ago broken promise of your death, 40 acres to formerly enslaved people.
I've long wondered what the United States would look like today if the formerly enslaved had been given the 40 acres. What would happen in the future if Black Americans had an equal wealth position with white Americans? I think it would open the doors for a flowering of Black creativity and contributions to American society that have been shunted or blocked as a consequence of economic deprivation.
So can you talk a bit about how you see the wealth gap playing out in Waterloo and what your hopes for the future are?
Yeah, so, in Waterloo, when we look at the wealth gap, one of the biggest things that contributes to that is home ownership. And when we look at the rate of Black home ownership in Waterloo, we're looking at the low 30%. When we look at the rate of white home ownership, we're looking at the low 70%. That's a huge difference. And then also, when we look at the ability to get loans, there's so many things for businesses. There's so many things that are contributing to the inequality when it comes to the wealth gap. But the home ownership rate is a big part of that.
So since the podcast aired a year ago, what has changed for you? Do you feel closer to achieving what you set out to do?
Definitely. Absolutely. So just being connected with people across the country, a great attorney, a great accounting firm, just a ton of great people who have just really poured in support, who are walking along the journey with us. We have, institutional support behind us. There's so many things that were not reality for us a year ago that are here today. And we're just super excited about where everything is going, and no doubt that we'll achieve our goals.
Is there, I know there's a lot of things you can't talk about, in the midst of that. Is there anything that you think would be helpful to share in terms of sort of now versus then?
Sure. So then I didn't have, I had consultants and they were amazing, but I didn't have an attorney. I did not have the accounting firm. I didn't have all of the people across the United States who heard the story and who have poured in financial support. I didn't have so many connections then that I have now. I didn't have the connections to the institutions and the people within the institutions who are committing to support, whether it be deposits once we're open, or helping with some of the seed capital that we're needing.
Two bits of news this year. In Ohio, there's a newly opened Black bank, which isn't Black owned, but Black run. And in Utah, there's a deal that was struck recently to turn an existing bank into the first new Black owned bank since 2000. So I wonder how that felt to hear.
It was super encouraging, very excited to see it happen because the struggles that Black Americans in Waterloo have felt for so long are the struggles that Black Americans have felt across the country. And so Black banks make such a huge difference in the communities that they serve. And so I'm ecstatic to see these other institutions getting launched, and just, really excited about the work, the quality of life improvements that can happen for Black people in more areas.
Also sort of, semi-recent, in some cases very recent, and there's these headwinds, inflation and higher interest rates and recent bank failures. How are these economic conditions playing into your journey?
Actually, it really is a benefit for us to be getting started at a time like this, because we can better prepare, and we can make better plans for tough times because we're starting in tough times. I really have empathy or sympathy even for the banks that are currently established, and they weren't really prepared for this. They weren't prepared for all the interest rate hikes. They weren't prepared for inflation. They weren't prepared for COVID. And there are a lot of banks that are probably struggling because of that. Our benefit is that we're able to walk into this seeing everything, and we're able to prepare. We don't have to try and fix things, and which is part of what happened with some of the with the bank failures as well, like just not prepared for this. And so I feel like it actually is a benefit for us to be starting right now.
So I don't want to put you on the spot. There may not be a clear answer to this, but just for people who are wondering, so, okay, there's been a lot of movement in the past year, it sounds like, so when might the bank open? Do you have a sense of timeline, approximately?
We're hoping to still get this year. So 2023 is still the goal.
In what ways can a Black-owned banking institution begin to address the racial wealth gap and the disparities that you see? And what are some potential challenges and limitations to this approach that you see?
Sure. So studies show that when there are Black-owned banks within communities, that those communities fare much better. You see higher home ownership rates. Redlining may be illegal, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't still happen. It still happens. And so making sure that people can get the loans that they need in the neighborhoods that they may want to live, even if they're the neighborhoods that are considered maybe undesirable by other institutions. But making sure that we are just being equitable within all communities, but really focusing on these underrepresented, underserved communities. And so I just see that being a big part of what we're doing, but then also the education around what it takes to be a homeowner, because as a first-time homeowner, especially if you're a first-generation homeowner, what that looks like, and really being prepared for all the costs of owning a home, having programs that we take people through to teach them how they need to prepare, the funds that you need to have set aside, for that roof or that furnace or all the things that can go wrong, making sure that people really are well prepared. So when they do get the home loan, they walk into the home, that they really are on solid footing. Also with small business, we know that in terms of wages, that there's a big wage gap between Black Americans and white Americans, Hispanics and white Americans. There's just a big wage gap. And so making sure that small businesses are able to get the funding that they need in order to grow and scale their businesses. A lot of times we find the solopreneurs or the very small or micro businesses just are not able to get funding to really get their footing. And so making sure that we are providing education and tools for them, and maybe some alternative types of loans and programs.
That actually, I think, leads well into the next question I want to ask you, which is that the 24/7 Black Leadership Advancement Consortium started in Waterloo after a report naming the region the worst in the country for Black residents to live in terms of the economics of the situation. And you direct the group's accelerator program for Black-owned businesses in Waterloo, which is one of a lot of local equity efforts going on now in Waterloo. There's just a lot happening. And so I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about lessons learned that could help people working on equity in their own communities.
Yeah, so one of the biggest lessons that we have learned is just the value, one, of getting the broader community involved and on board with what you're doing. So, with 24/7 Black starting, it wasn't just a group of Blacks that said, okay, we're going to do this and we have everything that we need. They said, we're going to do this and look for community support. And there was an outpouring of support from the community saying, yes, we need to address this. We do not want to be the number one worst place for Blacks to live. We don't want to be on that list at all. And so what do we need to do to help? And so as they identified areas, with small businesses and home ownership and with jobs, as they identified these areas and were able to really articulate, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, the community bought into it. So really making sure that you get people who are aligned with your vision on board, that has helped tremendously, because we're not working in silos anymore. It's like we really are working as a collective community to really advance things for Blacks within the community.
Yeah, and I can imagine, that, some of what you've learned specifically working on the accelerator might be helpful for people, because certainly there are business accelerators all around the country. Some of them are focused, some aren't, in terms of like who they're aiming to serve. And so, what are some of the lessons that you feel like you've learned, especially about what does it take to make an accelerator work if you're specifically looking to close gaps and disparities?
So one of the biggest lessons that we've learned is that you may have this curriculum that you have set and you are working through it, but you really have to listen to the people who are going through the program, because what you're teaching may not be as relevant to them as what you thought it would be. And so we've pivoted the program. Each cohort, we're on our 6th cohort right now, and each one has been different as we look at the needs of business owners, as we hear from them of what it is that they want and need to learn more about. So like being willing to listen and to change. And also with COVID and coming out of COVID, the world has changed and how we do things have changed, for everyone. And so really designing that program to make sure that we are addressing some of those issues as well. And then making sure also to integrate those participants within the broader community. So like last night, we had an event where we take them to a space called the Makerspace. And so, they're able to use tools and understand how to actually create things on their own with equipment that most of us are not going to be able to purchase, whether it's cost or the size of it. And then you've got people there who are able to help. We also last night for that program, we were honored by the United States Association of Small Business and Entrepreneurship, so USASB for short, for being the Model Community Accelerator. So we got that award for the accelerator program that we're doing. And one of the biggest things is just that we are being relevant. We're being very relevant to the people that we're serving, listening to them and not just saying, this is what we think and we're right and we'll do it our way, no matter if it's effective or not, like not having that bullheaded type of an attitude.
And you said that with every cohort, things change based on what the needs are of that cohort?
Things have shifted, even if it's just a little bit, things have shifted for every single cohort.
That's really interesting. How many business owners have gone through the program now?
So if we count the ones who are currently in the program, that will bring us to 60.
And this was we should do this, and it started situation like that all happened sort of like in the first maybe 6 months of the pandemic, as I recall. This is like starting in 2020. In
2020, yeah. So it was 24/7 Black, and I think 3 or 4 other organizations that had a conversation about them wanting to start an accelerator. And then I got a call early August of them wanting to start the accelerator and ask me to be the director, and that the program was starting September 1st. So everything was really fast. But the thing that's really great about it is that no one waited for the conditions to be perfect. When they asked me to direct the program, they didn't have any funding. Like there was no money available to pay me, but there was another organization that stepped in and said, hey, we'll pay her. And so having partners come along and really support like that was just amazing. But, not waiting for things to just line up with the stars, but saying this is needed and we're all in, we're going to do it, and making it happen.
Yeah, just the speed at which that got started, with all the moving pieces was just really amazing to see. Question from the audience, and for people who are listening in, please feel free to share your questions as well. This question is, ReShonda, have you heard from others that your working to start a bank has inspired other Black communities to do the same?
I have been reached out to by several others from different communities saying, hey, I really would like to do the same thing. How do you do this? How do you get started? And so I'll be honest, so many emails come through that some of them I know slip through the cracks, and I don't mean to ignore emails ever at all. But there just are a lot that do come through. But I have had several people who have asked and been encouraged by this journey.
And I appreciate that question because I had not thought to ask that, and that's really interesting. But also, it reminded me of to go back to the accelerator. The same thing happened in that case, right? Other communities got in touch with you in 20%.
Yeah. So one of our other Iowa communities, the Iowa City, our community had reached out, and we were able to help them to get started with their accelerator as well. So. It's just been great to be able to help people, along the journey. For myself, if I know something that can help somebody else, I'm wanting to tell them all the information so that they don't have, as long of a process getting started, or as hard of a process getting started, if I can help.
What do you think is sort of, if you can bring it down to maybe 1 or 2 things, like your top lessons of taking on something that feels really big?
One lesson is making sure that you do have a team, because you really can't do everything by yourself, well, especially when something really big. To try and do it by yourself is like mission impossible. So inviting others in, listening to others and being willing to just be open-minded for the input that you're going to get, because what you may think is like the greatest idea ever, someone else may come in with something else, and it's like, oh, okay, maybe it was the second greatest idea. So that would be the first thing, is making sure that you have a team of people around you. And then the second thing is, no matter how big something is, more than likely somebody else has done it before. So why can't you do it now? That's always my attitude. Somebody else did it, I can do it too.
I love that. We have a question from Megan in the audience who asks, cities like Baltimore are pushing to open more Black-owned banks and branches of existing Black-owned banks. What role do you think they play in helping to reduce the racial wealth gap?
So I feel like those opening additional locations, especially in a city like Baltimore, making sure that the banks are accessible and convenient for people to get to, the people that they're trying to serve. So I think that's really great that they're opening, more branches of existing Black-owned banks. I think that's amazing. And then in terms of reducing the racial wealth gap, just as we said, like we know that when Blacks go to banks for home loans, we're denied at least, I think it's at least at 3 times, the rate that whites are denied. And that's the same for small business loans. And so when you go into a Black-owned bank, you know that your chances are higher. You know that they're not looking at you being, discriminating against you because you're Black. You know that there's a difference there. And so when you can increase home ownership, you can, provide the funding that small business owners need in order to grow their businesses. And a lot of times small business owners start their business because their job is not paying them enough. And so it's not necessarily to replace their job, but to supplement the income that they're currently making. So if that income can be supplemented, especially needing to grow that business, if you can't do that, you're really stuck. And so Black banks do absolutely help to support the communities that are needing.
There's a part 2 to the question, but I figured the part 1 was enough. I wanted to let you address that first. The part 2 is, what steps do white-owned banks need to take to determine how effectively they're serving Black communities?
Yeah, so I think there are a few things. One, where's the location of your bank? Is it easily accessible? If it's not easily accessible, you may not be serving those communities that really are needing, like the Black communities that may be needing you to support. 2, looking at your staff. If they can look at their staff and see, does their staff represent the community that they serve? For Waterloo, we have a very diverse community. Not just Blacks and whites, but Hispanics and Bosnians and Burmese and, different African communities. When you walk into a bank, do you have people who reflect the community? If you're not hiring, if these banks aren't hiring in a way that, looks like the communities that they're trying to serve, they may not be serving them well. And then, just also looking at what are some of the things within Black communities that they may be able to support, whether, it's various programs. It could be like the 24/7 Black organization here. There are banks that are supporting with funds for pitch competitions or just for operating support. There may be organizations like that where if they're not able or wanting to be directly in the communities themselves, then support the organizations that are there doing it.
Thank you for sharing that. And just a reminder, again, if you've got questions, share them so that we can put them to ReShonda before our time is up. I wanted to pass on, this is actually a message and not a question. Stefan Coward with Bank Black USA wanted to send love and support. He's listening. And obviously this is a pretty tight-knit movement. There are not a lot of Black-owned banks still around in the U.S. So I'm curious whether your hope is to connect with some of the ones, or if you've been able to connect with some of the ones that are operating, as you go through your own journey.
Yes. So first, hello, Stefan, and thank you. I appreciate that. And then, definitely my desire to be connected with other Black-owned banks. Would love to be part of the National Bankers Association, for minority depositories. Just really wanting that support, wanting to be part of that network it's really important. So I have also been in touch with Nicole, who is head of the National Bankers Association. So, yeah.
And sorry, that was probably not clear. The actual question part of that was mine. I don't want to put that into Stefan's mouth, but it was a good reminder. There's a whole movement out there. So thanks for answering that. We have another viewer asking why banks and not credit unions.
So that was a big thing for us when we were thinking about how we were going to structure this. And what we ultimately came up with was with the credit union model, it's the model that you are a shareholder, you are an owner in this credit union. But what is the reality is that when you take your account, you take your account, like what you put into the account. If that credit union has, $1 billion in assets, you don't get a share of, whatever it is that they have. You don't get that. When we looked at the mission of credit unions, we are more aligned with the mission of credit unions in terms of serving our community. But when we thought, okay, we really want to go the bank route, one of the things that we thought about, one was that we are able to offer shares of stock in the bank to the community. So if you are a shareholder, if you own shares of stock in the bank, you get to grow and profit with us, which is different than the credit union model. If if the shares of stock end up going up, then you get more out than what you've put in. And when we talk about the wealth gap and we talk about investing, that for us is us modeling what it is that we're talking about. And then also in terms of our mission, we can be mission oriented because that's what we're designing ourselves to be. You don't need a nonprofit status in order to be missionally driven. And so we really wanted to make sure that as we're talking about wealth generation and we're talking about investing, that we actually open up those opportunities to people who otherwise often would not have those opportunities open up to them.
Let's see. Another question is, and this is from Dr. Fancy. At the end of the day, a bank is a business, and Yancy, I'm sorry about that. At the end of the day, a bank is a business, and it needs to be profitable. What are some of the performance measures that will determine the success of your bank, the Bank of Jabez?
Absolutely. I mean, it is a business, just like a credit union is a business, and we all need to be profitable. Nonprofit or not, they are profitable, and so the banks are the same. So of course, we will be looking at the value of our shares for one. Like, are those share values increasing? We'll be looking at the return on investment in terms of our loans. We'll look at for the interest income that we're bringing in, for interchange income. All of those things are important. We'll be monitoring all of that. Absolutely, we are here to be profitable, and if we're going to help others generate wealth, we have to make sure that we are, looking at all the measures that there are in order to make us profitable. There's a difference between being profitable and just being outright greedy. And so we're not there for greed. We are there for profit, and we're there to also, support our shareholders, which are your average, normal, everyday people.
I know you addressed this on the podcast, but for anybody who hasn't heard it or maybe is wondering, did that change in the last year? Are you aiming to be CEO, or are you going to be looking for a CEO?
Looking for a CEO for sure. Yeah.
Allie has a question. She says, "Congrats on all you're achieving. What can individuals do to support your efforts?" Thank you,
Allie. You can. Well, one, we always say if you can just push out what we're doing. And make sure, when we open, we never ask anyone to close an account with the bank. We just say, open another one, and allow us to actually serve you as well. Also, we do for pre-opening expenses, we do have a link on our site, on our website, which is bankofjabez.com, and so people can go there. There's a link that says support us. And you can support us as well through that link and just get more information about the bank and some other resources that are there.
Joseph asks, are you a B corporation?
We are looking to be a B corporation. Yes, that's the model that we're wanting to go after.
Do you mind explaining briefly for folks who are like, I've never heard of that before? It's a very interesting model.
Yeah, so for a benefit corporation, a lot of corporations we don't even realize are benefit corporations, but they are basically missionally minded organizations that are, also looking out for like the good of the environment, the good of the communities that they serve. They're more missionally driven than your regular corporation, but they're not a nonprofit, and so we really do want to model after that, or the B Corporation model, because we are missionally driven, but we are a for-profit organization.
This is a question I'm wondering, and perhaps some listeners are too. If you're in a smaller community, Waterloo is, depends, small is relative, but it's not one of the largest metro areas. I can see why, that might feel like, well, how am I going to be able to get this thing started, or how can I get this funding? I'm not near where, I'm not in a big city. But what I've heard from you and others in Waterloo is that there's some real advantages to that size too. And so I wondered if you could talk a little bit about what it's been like to work on equity in a community that isn't like a large city.
Yeah, so one of the benefits of working on equity in a small city, like Waterloo, is that it doesn't take as much to get to the people who are in charge. And so, oftentimes, the heads of organizations, you have relationships with them. It makes a difference when you can be in a community where people actually know one another, and people. If you don't know them, then probably one or two people that you talk to, and you can be connected with them. So that's a huge benefit of being in a smaller area.
We really appreciate you spending this time with us. Thank you so much for being here to share your journey in the past year. Is there anything else you'd like to share with people?
No, just, thank you all for being on and for following the journey. And hopefully you will see bigger stories about us later in the year.
Thanks again. And thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate it. There should be links shared to point you to the podcast if you haven't listened to it, but you can find it anywhere you listen to podcasts. It's called The Heist. And ReShonda's story is the second season. There are also stories, like written stories about her journey and related things, including some of the equity efforts in Waterloo at Beyond the Bank at publicintegrity.org. Thank you again.